The blood on Violet Sullivan's white cotton sleeve had dried to a rust-brown stain by the time she stepped off the stagecoach in Pinos Altos, New Mexico. And though she had scrubbed at it until her knuckles were raw, the mark remained like an accusation she could not wash away. It was July of 1878, and the summer heat pressed down on the dusty mining town with the weight of a blacksmith's anvil. Yet Violet wore a long-sleeved dress buttoned to her wrists and a shawl draped over her shoulders despite the sweat that trickled down her spine. She clutched her carpetbag with trembling fingers and surveyed the wooden buildings that lined the main street, searching for the boarding house her late aunt had written about in letters that now seemed to come from another lifetime. The town sprawled across the hillside in a haphazard arrangement of structures that had clearly grown up around the mining operations. Prospectors and cowboys moved through the street with purpose, their boots kicking up clouds of pale dust that hung in the still air. Violet could hear the distant sound of pickaxes striking rock, the clang of metal on metal from the blacksmith's forge, and the off-key piano music drifting from one of the saloons. She had come here because she had nowhere else to go, because the small inheritance from her aunt included a modest house on the edge of town, and because she needed to be somewhere her husband could not find her. She had left Thomas 3 days ago while he lay passed out drunk on their bedroom floor in Santa Fe, his knuckles still bruised from where they had connected with her ribs. The memory made her flinch even now, standing in the bright sunlight surrounded by strangers. She had taken only what she could carry, and the small amount of money she had hidden away over the past year, tucking coins into the hem of her winter coat and the toe of an old boot whenever Thomas was too drunk to notice. It was not much, but it was enough to buy passage on the stage and perhaps a few weeks of food while she figured out what came next. The boarding house turned out to be unnecessary. Mrs. Chen at the general store, a practical woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, had known Violet's aunt well and was happy to provide directions to the small house that now belonged to her niece. It sat at the eastern edge of town, a simple adobe structure with a wooden door and 2 shuttered windows that faced the mountains. The roof needed patching and the yard was overgrown with desert scrub, but it was hers, and more importantly, it had a door she could lock from the inside. Violet spent her first 3 days in Pinos Altos cleaning the house and trying not to jump at every sound. She scrubbed the floors and walls, beat the dust from the old mattress, and repaired the broken shutters as best she could with rusty nails she found in a tin can under the sink. She worked until her body ached and her hands were blistered, welcoming the honest pain of labor that she had chosen for herself. At night, she wedged a chair under the door handle and lay awake listening to the coyotes howl in the hills, wondering how long it would take Thomas to track her down and what he would do when he found her. She ventured into town only when necessary, keeping her head down and her sleeves buttoned. Mrs. Chen sold her flour, beans, and coffee on credit against the small account her aunt had maintained, and asked no questions about the way Violet favored her left side or the yellowing bruise that shadowed her cheekbone, despite the powder she had tried to use to hide it. The older woman simply packed the supplies with care and told Violet to come back whenever she needed anything at all, and there was something in her eyes that suggested she understood more than Violet had said. It was on her 4th day in Pinos Altos that Violet met Bennett Wright. She had been trying to repair the sagging fence around her small yard, struggling with a post that had rotted at the base and needed to be replaced entirely. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat soaked through her dress despite the shade of her wide-brimmed bonnet. She had removed her shawl out of necessity, but kept her sleeves buttoned even as the heat made her head swim. The post refused to budge no matter how hard she pulled, and she was beginning to feel dizzy from the exertion and the heat when a shadow fell across her work. "That post is not going to come out unless you dig around it first," a male voice said, and Violet spun around so quickly she nearly lost her balance. The man who stood at the edge of her property was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly where it touched the collar of his shirt. He wore dusty work clothes and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. His eyes were a surprising shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they studied her with an expression that was more curious than threatening. "I did not realize I had an audience," Violet said, trying to keep her voice steady. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the instinctive fear of strange men making her mouth go dry. "I did not mean to startle you. I am Bennett Wright. I work the claim up the mountain a ways, but I have been helping your neighbor, Mr. Garcia, with some carpentry work. He mentioned your aunt passed and that her niece had come to take the house." He gestured toward the fence post. "That one is going to need to be dug out and replaced. If you have a shovel, I could help with that." Violet's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned the hard way that accepting help from men always came with a price, and she had no currency left to pay except the small scraps of safety she had managed to gather around herself like a threadbare blanket. But the post genuinely needed to be replaced, and she did not have the strength to do it alone, and there was something in Bennett Wright's steady gaze that did not set off the alarm bells that usually clangored in her head when strange men approached her. "I have a shovel," she said finally. "It is around the back." Bennett nodded and waited while she retrieved it, making no move to come closer or to enter her property without explicit permission. When she returned, he took the shovel with a quiet word of thanks and set to work digging around the rotted post. He worked efficiently and without unnecessary conversation, and Violet found herself watching the easy strength in his movements, the way he seemed completely focused on the task at hand rather than on her. "You should go inside," Bennett said after a few minutes, glancing up at her. "This heat is nothing to take lightly, and you are dressed for winter rather than summer." "I am fine," Violet said automatically, though she could feel the sweat running down her back and her vision had started to blur at the edges. "With respect, Mrs. Sullivan, you do not look fine. You look about ready to keel over." His voice was matter-of-fact rather than critical. "I can finish this myself. It will take maybe another half hour, and then I can set the new post if you have one, or I can bring one by tomorrow." The use of her married name made her stomach clench, even though she knew he had simply assumed she was married based on her age and the modest gold band she still wore because taking it off felt like admitting defeat. "Miss Sullivan," she corrected quietly, "and I do not have a new post yet." Something flickered in Bennett's expression, but he simply nodded. "I will bring one by tomorrow then, if that is acceptable to you. Free of charge," he added, as if reading the worry in her eyes. "Your Aunt Mary was kind to me when I first came to town. She let me sleep in her shed for a week when I had nowhere else to go. I would consider it paying back a debt." Violet wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the walls she had built around herself, but the heat was making her nauseated and the ache in her ribs was getting worse. "Thank you," she managed, and then she turned and walked back to the house before pride could make her collapse in front of this stranger who seemed determined to be kind. Inside, she pressed her back against the closed door and tried to slow her racing heart. Through the window, she could see Bennett Wright working on the fence, his movements steady and unhurried. He did not look toward the house, did not try to catch a glimpse of her through the window. He simply worked until the rotted post was free. Then he left it leaning against the fence, collected his shovel, and walked away without knocking on her door or demanding thanks or payment. Violet watched him go and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, something that might have been hope if she had allowed herself to believe in such things anymore. True to his word, Bennett returned the next morning with a fresh-cut post slung over his shoulder. Violet had spent the night alternating between relief that he had not tried to force his way into her home and anxiety that he would return and expect something in return for his help. She had dressed in another long-sleeved dress despite the heat, this one a faded blue that had seen better days, and she had braided her dark hair and pinned it up to keep it off her neck. When she heard his footsteps in the yard, she took a deep breath and opened the door before he could knock. "Good morning, Mr. Wright." "Morning, Miss Sullivan." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that Thomas had never bothered with. "I have your post. It should take me about an hour to get it set properly. I brought my own water, so you need not worry about that." "Would you like some coffee?" The offer escaped before Violet could think better of it. "I made a fresh pot." Bennett paused, and Violet thought she saw a surprise flash across his face before he smiled. It was a genuine smile that reached his eyes and created small lines at the corners, the smile of someone who did not give them out lightly. "Coffee would be very welcome, thank you." Violet retreated to the kitchen and poured 2 cups with shaking hands, trying to understand why she had invited this man, this stranger, to share her coffee when she had been so careful to avoid everyone since arriving in town. Perhaps it was because he had left yesterday without demanding anything. Perhaps it was because his smile had been kind. Perhaps it was simply because she was desperately lonely, and the silence of her small house had begun to feel like a tomb. She carried the cups outside and found Bennett measuring the hole he had dug the previous day. He accepted the coffee with another quiet word of thanks and took a careful sip before setting the cup on a flat rock where it would not spill. "How long have you been in Pinos Altos?" Violet asked, surprised at her own boldness. "About 2 years now. I came out from Kansas after my parents died. There was nothing left for me there, and I had heard about the mining opportunities here." He picked up the new post and tested its weight. "The claim does not produce much, but it is enough to live on, and the work is honest." "Is it lonely, working up in the mountains by yourself?" Bennett considered the question as he positioned the post in the hole. "Sometimes. But I prefer my own company to bad company, and I have learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely." There was something in the way he said it that made Violet think he understood more than he was saying. She sipped her coffee and watched him work, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something almost like peace settle over her. Bennett finished setting the post and packing the dirt around it, testing its stability with a firm shake. "That should hold for a good long while. If you need any other repairs done, I am happy to help. Your aunt's kindness meant a lot to me, and I do not forget debts." "You have more than repaid any debt," Violet said, "but I appreciate the offer. The truth is, there is quite a lot that needs fixing. The roof leaks in the back room, and one of the shutters will not close properly, and the stove does not draw well when the wind comes from the east. I could come by a few evenings a week, after I finish at the claim, if that would be acceptable to you." Bennett's tone was carefully neutral, giving her room to refuse without awkwardness. Violet knew she should say no. She knew that accepting more help would mean more interactions, more chances for him to see too much, more opportunities for Thomas to hear that she had been spending time with another man. But the house genuinely needed repairs, and she had no money to hire someone, and there was something about Bennett Wright that made her want to take the risk. "That would be acceptable," she said. "Thank you." So began an arrangement that brought Bennett to Violet's small adobe house 3 evenings a week. He came after the sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, when the worst of the heat had broken and the desert air started to cool. He worked on the roof, replacing damaged tiles and sealing the leaks with pitch. He repaired the balky shutter and adjusted the stovepipe until it drew properly. He fixed the back step that had started to sag and reinforced the door frame that had warped in the dry heat. Violet, in turn, began to cook meals she could share with him. It seemed only fair, she told herself, since he refused to accept any payment for his labor. She made simple dishes with the supplies misses. Chen provided on credit: beans and cornbread, stew with whatever vegetables were available, biscuits with honey when she could afford it. They ate together at the small table in her kitchen as the evening light slanted through the windows, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. Bennett told her about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about the tornado that had destroyed their crops 2 years running, and the fever that had taken his parents within a week of each other. He spoke about the loneliness of being the last of his family, and the strange freedom of having nothing tying him to any particular place. He described the back-breaking work of mining and the small satisfactions of finding a good vein of silver, the camaraderie of the other miners, and the rough justice of a town still finding its footing on the edge of civilization. Violet shared less, but she told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her father who had been a clerk and her mother who had died when Violet was 12. She mentioned the aunt who had moved west for her health and sent occasional letters full of descriptions of the mountains and the vast blue sky. She spoke carefully around the years after her father died, around the marriage she had made at 19 to a man who had seemed charming and steady, around the slow realization that charm could hide cruelty and steadiness could become suffocating control. Bennett never pushed for more than she offered. He seemed to understand that there were things she could not speak about, wounds too raw to expose to the light. He filled the silences with stories of his own or with comfortable quiet, and he never overstayed his welcome, always leaving before full dark so that Violet could bar her door and feel safe in her solitude. It was on a particularly hot evening in late July, nearly a month after Violet had arrived in Pinos Altos, that the fragile piece shattered. Bennett had been working on replacing a section of the roof that had rotted through, and Violet had been in the kitchen preparing supper. She had grown comfortable enough in his presence that she had rolled her sleeves up to her elbows to keep them out of the bread, though she was kneading, too focused on her task to remember why she never, ever exposed her forearms. She did not realize her mistake until she carried a glass of water out to Bennett and found him staring at her arms with an expression she could not quite read. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Violet looked down and saw what he was seeing: the mottled purple and yellow bruises that circled her wrists like ugly bracelets, the finger-shaped marks on her forearms, the thin white scars that traced across her skin like a map of old pain. "It is not what you think," she said automatically, though her voice came out strangled and false. She set the water down with shaking hands and tried to pull her sleeves back down, but the dough had made the fabric damp, and it clung stubbornly to her skin. Bennett climbed down from the roof with careful, deliberate movements. His face had gone very still, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled in a way that somehow made it more dangerous. "What do I think, Miss Sullivan? I am clumsy. I bruise easily. It is nothing to concern yourself with." The lies tasted like ash in her mouth, but they were the same lies she had told for 3 years, and they came easily out of habit. "Those bruises are shaped like fingers." Bennett's eyes met hers, and there was something fierce burning in their depths. "Someone put their hands on you hard enough to leave those marks, multiple times from the look of it." Violet felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back angrily. She would not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry anymore. It is none of your concern. I should not have bothered you with supper. You should go. I am not going anywhere until you tell me who did this to you. There was no anger in Bennett's voice, only a terrible, gentle certainty that made something crack open in Violet's chest. My husband, she whispered, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff into empty air. Thomas. He has a temper, and when he drinks, which is often, he forgets to control it. I left him 3 weeks ago. I came here because I had nowhere else to go and because I thought he might not find me here. Does he know about your aunt's house? I do not know. Maybe. She wrote to me sometimes, but I always hid her letters. Thomas did not like it when I got mail from anyone. Violet wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the lingering heat. He will come looking for me eventually. He will not let me go without a fight. He believes I belong to him. Bennett was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight and his hands curled into fists at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. You do not belong to anyone except yourself, and if he comes here, he will have to go through me first. You do not understand. Thomas is dangerous. He has a gun and he knows how to use it. He will not hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in his way. Neither will I. Bennett took a step closer, and Violet forced herself not to flinch away. I am not going to let anyone hurt you again, Violet. I give you my word on that. It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his voice, spoken with such quiet conviction, made the tears she had been fighting spill over. She turned away, not wanting him to see her weakness, but Bennett moved around to face her again. He did not touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, a living shield between her and the world. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why do you care what happens to me? You barely know me. I know enough, Bennett said simply. I know you are brave enough to leave a bad situation when a lot of women would not. I know you work hard and do not complain, even when you are clearly hurting. I know you have a kind heart and a quick mind and a smile that makes me want to keep working on your house just so I have an excuse to see it. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. And I know that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I first saw you trying to pull out that fence post in the blazing heat while wearing enough clothes for a winter day. Violet looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw was honesty and something that might have been the beginnings of love, fragile and new as a desert flower after rain. I do not know how to trust anyone anymore, she whispered. Then do not trust me yet. Let me earn it. Bennett reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away, and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. His touch was so careful, so different from Thomas's brutal hands, that it made her want to cry all over again. Let me prove to you that not all men are like your husband. Let me show you what it means to be protected instead of hurt. Violet nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Bennett pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. He held her like she was something precious, his arms secure but not confining, and for the first time in 3 years, Violet felt truly safe. They stood like that until the sun touched the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Then Bennett pulled back, keeping his hands on her shoulders, and looked down at her with serious eyes. I want you to promise me something. If your husband shows up, or if anyone makes you feel unsafe, you come find me immediately. I do not care if it is the middle of the night or if I am down in the mine. You come find me. Can you promise me that? I promise, Violet said, and she meant it. From that evening on, something shifted between them. Bennett still came 3 evenings a week to work on the house, but now there was an openness between them that had not existed before. Violet no longer felt the need to hide her bruises or make excuses for the way she sometimes flinched at sudden movements. Bennett, in turn, became more openly protective, checking the locks on her doors and windows, teaching her how to bar them properly, even bringing her a rifle from his own collection, and spending several evenings teaching her how to load and fire it. "I am not much of a shot," Violet said after missing the tin can Bennett had set up on a fence post for the 3rd time in a row. "You do not need to be a sharpshooter. You just need to be able to make enough noise and look dangerous enough to make someone think twice about coming after you." Bennett stood behind her, adjusting her stance and the way she held the rifle. "Try again, and this time keep both eyes open and breathe out slowly as you squeeze the trigger." Violet tried again, and this time the can went flying. She lowered the rifle with a surprised laugh, the first genuinely happy sound she had made in longer than she could remember. "I did it." "You did." Bennett's smile was proud and warm. "Practice a few more times and you will be able to hit anything you aim at." They practiced until the light began to fade and Violet's shoulder ached from the rifle's kick. Then they went inside, and Violet heated up the stew she had made earlier while Bennett washed up at the basin. It felt domestic and comfortable, like something she might have dreamed about in another life when she still believed in happy endings. Over supper, Bennett told her about a letter he had received from an old friend in Kansas, and Violet found herself telling him about the book she was reading, borrowed from Mrs. Chen's surprisingly extensive collection. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared laughter. When Bennett finally stood to leave, Violet walked him to the door and found herself reluctant to see him go. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For fixing my house and teaching me to shoot, and for not making me feel like I am crazy or weak for what I have been through." "You are neither of those things," Bennett said firmly. He hesitated, then reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Violet Sullivan." The way he looked at her made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Without thinking too hard about it, Violet rose up on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Bennett." She could see the surprise and pleasure in his eyes as he touched the spot where her lips had been. "Good night, Violet. I will see you tomorrow." August arrived with its brutal heat, and with it came the growing certainty that Violet was falling in love with Bennett Wright. It was a terrifying realization, made more complicated by the fact that she was still legally married to a man who would kill her if he found her, and possibly kill Bennett too. But love, she was learning, did not wait for convenient timing or safe circumstances. It grew where it wanted to grow, stubborn and persistent as the desert plants that bloomed after rain. Bennett seemed to feel it too. His touches lingered longer now, his hand on her back as he guided her through the door, his fingers tangling with hers as they sat on her front step watching the sunset. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. And when he finally kissed her one evening as they stood in her kitchen washing dishes, it felt like coming home. "I am still married," Violet whispered against his lips, even as she wound her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. "I know." Bennett's hand settled on her waist, careful of her still healing ribs. "But you will not be married forever. And when you are free, I am going to ask you to marry me properly." "What if I say no?" she asked, half teasing. "Then I will ask you again the next day and the day after that until you finally say yes." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Violet felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. They were careful, never letting their relationship progress beyond kisses and gentle embraces. Bennett was adamant about respecting her boundaries and not putting her in a position that might cause trouble if Thomas ever did show up. But they were not careful enough to hide the growing affection between them from the residents of Pinos Altos, who had started to notice that Bennett Wright spent most of his evenings at Violet Sullivan's house, and that both of them wore matching looks of quiet happiness. Mrs. Chen mentioned it one afternoon when Violet came by for supplies. "That Bennett is a good man. Your aunt would have approved." "We are just friends," Violet said automatically, then felt her cheeks flush at Mrs. Chen's knowing look. "Friends who look at each other like that do not stay just friends for long," Mrs. Chen said with a small smile. "And that is as it should be. You deserve some happiness, child. Whatever you left behind in Santa Fe, you do not need to let it poison your future." Violet felt tears prick at her eyes. "What if he finds me? What if Thomas comes here and ruins everything?" Mrs. Chen's expression turned serious. "Then the men of this town will deal with him. We protect our own here, and you are one of us now. You and Bennett both." It was not the answer Violet had expected, but it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the August heat. She had spent so long feeling alone, feeling like she had no one to turn to, that the idea of being part of a community felt almost foreign. But as she walked home with her supplies, she noticed the way Mr. Garcia waved to her from his yard, the way the blacksmith tipped his hat as she passed, the way the women sitting outside the boarding house called out friendly greetings. She had not realized it, but somewhere in the past 2 months, Pinos Altos had become home. The illusion of safety lasted until the 3rd week of August, when Thomas Sullivan rode into town on a sweating horse and started asking questions about a woman matching Violet's description. Bennett heard about it from one of the other miners before Thomas had been in town for more than an hour, and he came straight to Violet's house without bothering to clean up from his work. "He is here," Bennett said without preamble when Violet opened the door. "Your husband. He arrived about an hour ago and has been asking around about you." The blood drained from Violet's face, and she gripped the doorframe for support. "Where is he now?" "At the saloon, last I heard. But it is only a matter of time before someone tells him where you live." Bennett took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Pack a bag with whatever you absolutely need. You are coming to my claim until we figure out what to do. He will find me there too, and he will hurt you." Violet's voice shook despite her best efforts to control it. "Let him try." Bennett's expression was grim. "I would like to see him attempt it." They did not have time to argue. Violet threw a change of clothes, her few precious possessions, and the rifle Bennett had given her into her carpet bag while Bennett checked the windows and doors. They were about to leave when they heard heavy footsteps on the front step and a fist pounding on the door. "Violet, I know you are in there. Open this door right now." Thomas's voice was slurred with drink, and hearing it again after 2 months of freedom made Violet's stomach turn with fear. Bennett moved between Violet and the door, his body tense and ready. "Go out the back window. Head to Mr. Garcia's house. He will help you. I am not leaving you here alone with him, and I am not letting him anywhere near you." Bennett's voice was steel. "Go, Violet, please." The pounding on the door intensified, and they heard Thomas curse viciously. "I will break this door down, Violet. You are my wife, and you are coming home with me if I have to drag you by your hair." Something inside Violet snapped. She had run from Thomas once, had spent 3 years living in fear of his fists and his rage. She was done running. "No," she said quietly and picked up the rifle. Bennett's eyes widened. "Violet, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago." Violet checked that the rifle was loaded, then moved to stand beside Bennett. Her hands were steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Thomas," she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the door. "Go away. I am not your wife anymore, and I am not going anywhere with you." There was a moment of stunned silence, then Thomas laughed, the sound ugly and cruel. "You think you can tell me what to do? You think you can just leave and embarrass me in front of the whole town? I am going to teach you a lesson you will never forget." The door shuddered under a powerful kick, and Bennett moved to brace it with his body. "You need to leave, Sullivan. Your wife does not want you here, and you are trespassing on her property." "Who the hell are you?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising to a shout. "Are you the man who has been keeping my wife warm? I am going to kill you, and then I am going to make Violet wish she had never been born." Another kick, and this time the wood around the lock began to splinter. Bennett grabbed Violet's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house. But before they could reach the window, the front door burst open and Thomas Sullivan stumbled inside. Violet had tried to forget what her husband looked like, but seeing him now brought it all rushing back. He was a large man with graying hair and a florid face, his features twisted with rage and alcohol. His hand went to the gun at his hip, and Violet raised her rifle without thinking. "Get out of my house," she said, and she barely recognized her own voice, cold and hard as granite. Thomas stared at her, and for the first time since Violet had known him, she saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "You are not going to shoot me. You do not have the spine for it. Try me." Violet kept the rifle trained on his chest. "I left you because I would rather die alone in the desert than spend one more day under your roof. I am not afraid of you anymore, Thomas, and if you take one step closer, I will put a bullet in you and sleep like a baby afterward." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Thomas's hand twitched toward his gun, and everything happened at once. Bennett lunged forward, and Thomas drew his weapon, and Violet pulled the trigger. The rifle's report was deafening in the small room, and the recoil nearly knocked her off her feet. Thomas screamed and dropped his gun, clutching at his shoulder where blood was already starting to seep through his shirt. "You shot me," he gasped, his face gone white with shock and pain. "You actually shot me. And I will shoot you again if you do not get out of my house right now," Violet said, working the rifle's lever to chamber another round the way Bennett had taught her. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest, but her hands were steady. The commotion had drawn attention. Mr. Garcia appeared in the broken doorway, followed by several other men from town, all of them armed. The sheriff, a weathered man named Douglas who had been a lawman in 3 territories, pushed his way through the crowd and surveyed the scene with sharp eyes. "Someone want to tell me what is going on here?" Sheriff Douglas asked. "This man broke into my house and threatened to kill me and Mr. Wright," Violet said before Thomas could speak. "I shot him in self-defense. She is my wife. She ran away from home and I came to bring her back." "That is my legal right." Thomas was cradling his wounded shoulder, his face twisted with pain and fury. "Your legal right ended when you put your hands on her," Bennett said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made everyone in the room look at him. "Sheriff, I have seen the bruises." Miss Sullivan came to Pinos Altos to escape her husband's abuse. He broke down her door and drew his weapon first. She was defending herself and had every right to do so. Sheriff Douglas looked at Violet, taking in her long sleeves despite the heat, the fading bruise on her cheekbone, the way she held herself rigid and ready to bolt. Then he looked at Thomas, bleeding and furious, and his expression hardened. "Mr. Sullivan, you are under arrest for breaking and entering, assault, and attempted murder." "You cannot arrest me. She is my property." "Women are not property in New Mexico territory," Sheriff Douglas said coldly. "And even if they were, that would not give you the right to beat them or threaten them with a gun." He gestured to 2 of the men. "Get him to the doctor, then lock him up. I will deal with him after I sort out this mess." As Thomas was hauled away, still cursing and threatening, Violet slowly lowered the rifle. Her whole body started to shake, and the weapon would have fallen from her nerveless fingers if Bennett had not gently taken it from her. He set it aside and pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest and finally let herself cry. "You were so brave," Bennett murmured into her hair. "So incredibly brave. It is over now, Violet. He cannot hurt you any more." Sheriff Douglas took their statements and examined the broken door, and Thomas's gun lying on the floor. He spoke to the neighbors who had witnessed Thomas pounding on the door and shouting threats. By the time he was done, it was clear that Violet had acted in self-defense, and that Thomas Sullivan was the only one who would face charges. "He will likely get a few years in prison for this," Sheriff Douglas told Violet as the sun began to set. "And while you are still legally married to him, there are lawyers in Santa Fe who can help you file for divorce on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. It is not easy and it is not cheap, but it can be done." "I do not have much money," Violet said quietly. "I do," Bennett said. "Or at least enough. Whatever it costs, we will find a way." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Good man. Mrs. Sullivan, I would advise you to stay with someone else tonight while your door is being repaired, and in the future, if anyone threatens you, come to me first. That is what I am here for." Mr. Garcia volunteered to fix the door the next morning, and Mrs. Chen offered to let Violet stay in her spare room. But Violet found herself accepting when Bennett quietly suggested she come back to his claim instead. She was exhausted and shaky and wanted nothing more than to be somewhere she felt completely safe. And the only place that fit that description was wherever Bennett Wright happened to be. Bennett's claim was a 20-minute walk up into the foothills, where the scrub pine grew a little thicker and the air was marginally cooler. His cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and sturdy furniture he had made himself. It was clean and organized, with books stacked on a shelf near the window and cooking supplies neatly arranged on hooks above the stove. "It is not much," Bennett said, suddenly seeming uncertain, "but you are welcome to stay as long as you need." Violet looked around the cabin and felt something settle in her chest. It was not the size of the space or the quality of the furnishings that mattered. It was the sense of peace that filled it, the knowledge that she was welcome and wanted and safe. "It is perfect," she said softly. That night, Bennett insisted she take his bed while he made up a pallet on the floor. Violet protested, but he was immovable on the subject, and she was too exhausted to argue for long. She lay in his narrow bed surrounded by the faint scent of pine and leather that seemed to cling to everything he owned. And for the first time since leaving Santa Fe, she slept deeply and without nightmares. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying. Morning light slanted through the window, and she could hear Bennett moving around the cabin, trying to be quiet. Violet lay still for a moment, savoring the strange luxury of waking without fear, before she got up and joined him. "Good morning," Bennett said, flipping the bacon with practiced ease. "I did not mean to wake you." "You did not. That smells wonderful." They ate breakfast together, and then Bennett showed her around the claim, pointing out the entrance to the mine and the small sluice where he washed the ore. "I will need to work today, but you are welcome to stay here in the cabin or explore if you like. Just stay within shouting distance in case you need anything." Violet spent the morning exploring Bennett's small library and tidying the cabin, needing something to keep her hands busy while her mind processed everything that had happened. She had shot Thomas. She had actually pulled the trigger and put a bullet in him. The realization kept hitting her in waves, bringing with it a complicated mix of triumph, horror, and relief. By the time Bennett returned for lunch, grimy and sweating from his work, Violet had made a simple meal and come to a decision. "I need to go back to town," she told him. "I need to see Sheriff Douglas and start the process of divorcing Thomas, and I need to reclaim my house and my life. I cannot hide up here forever, no matter how much I might want to." Bennett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "If that is what you want, I will support you. But let me come with you, at least for the first few days. I want to make sure that door is secure before you stay there alone." They returned to Pinos Altos that afternoon to find that Mr. Garcia had already repaired the door and reinforced the frame. Mrs. Chen had cleaned up the blood and swept out the broken wood, and several of the neighbors had left small gifts on Violet's doorstep. A fresh loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, a bundle of wildflowers. The simple kindness of it all made Violet's eyes sting with tears. Over the next weeks, Violet began to rebuild her life. Sheriff Douglas helped her contact a lawyer in Santa Fe, a stern woman named Margaret Hayes, who specialized in helping women escape bad marriages. The legal process was complicated and expensive, but Bennett had been true to his word about paying for it, dipping into his savings without complaint or expectation of repayment. Thomas, nursing his wounded shoulder in the town jail, tried at first to fight the charges and the divorce, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Too many people had witnessed his violent arrival, and Violet's bruises and Bennett's testimony painted a clear picture of years of abuse. The judge who rode through Pinos Altos on circuit was a woman with no patience for men who beat their wives, and she threw the book at Thomas Sullivan, sentencing him to 5 years hard labor and granting Violet her divorce in the same hearing. "You are free," Margaret Hayes told Violet as they stood outside the makeshift courthouse in late September. "Legally, completely free. He has no claim on you anymore." Violet had thought she would feel elation or relief, but instead she just felt tired and oddly empty, like she had been carrying a heavy weight for so long that she no longer knew how to walk without it. Bennett, who had sat through the entire hearing with her hand clasped in his, seemed to sense her mood. He did not offer congratulations or celebration, just steady presence as they walked back to her house through the cooling evening air. "What do I do now?" Violet asked as they sat on her front step watching the stars appear. "I have spent so long just trying to survive that I do not know what to do with freedom." "Whatever you want," Bennett said simply. "You could stay here and build a life in Pinos Altos. You could go back to St. Louis or somewhere else entirely. You could open a shop or start a garden or do nothing at all for a while. The choice is entirely yours, and that is the beauty of it." Violet leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. "What if I want to stay here? With you?" Bennett's arm came around her, pulling her closer. "Then I would be the happiest man in 3 territories." He paused, then added quietly, "I know I said I would wait until you were free to ask you properly, and you have only been divorced for about 4 hours, so this might be too soon. But Violet Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Violet turned to look at him, this man who had seen her at her most broken and vulnerable and had chosen to stand beside her anyway. This man who had fixed her house and taught her to shoot and held her when she cried. This man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like opening a door to a future she had never let herself imagine. "Yes, I will marry you, Bennett Wright." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Violet felt the last of the darkness that had clung to her since Santa Fe finally began to lift. She was free. She was loved. She was home. They were married in October, when the heat had finally broken and the aspens on the mountainsides turned gold. It was a small ceremony at the church in Pinos Altos, with Mrs. Chen and Mr. Garcia standing as witnesses, and half the town crowding into the pews to watch. Violet wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and Bennett wore his best shirt, and a look of such open joy that it made several of the older women dab at their eyes. Sheriff Douglas officiated, having been deputized for the occasion, and his normally gruff voice was surprisingly gentle as he led them through their vows. When he told Bennett he could kiss his bride, the whole church erupted in cheers and applause. Violet laughed against Bennett's lips, feeling lighter and happier than she could ever remember being. The celebration afterward was held at the saloon, which the owner had graciously cleared out for the occasion. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and an overwhelming outpouring of goodwill from the community that had adopted Violet as one of their own. She danced with Bennett and with Mr. Garcia and with Sheriff Douglas, who proved to be surprisingly light on his feet. She accepted congratulations and well wishes from people she had barely spoken to, all of them genuine in their happiness for her. As the evening wore on and the party showed no signs of slowing, Bennett leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Want to slip away? I have something I want to show you." Violet nodded, and they made their escape while everyone was distracted by a particularly enthusiastic fiddle player. Bennett led her up the trail to his claim, but instead of going to the cabin, he guided her to a spot on the hillside where the view opened up to show the whole valley spread out below, the town lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "I have been working on something," Bennett said, and there was a note of nervous excitement in his voice that Violet had never heard before. "I wanted to surprise you, but now seems like the right time to show you." He led her around the side of the hill to where a second structure stood, larger than the cabin and newly built. Even in the moonlight, Violet could see that it was a proper house, with a wide porch and multiple rooms and windows that would catch the morning sun. "You built us a house." Violet's voice came out choked with emotion. "I have been working on it every spare moment for the past 2 months. It is not completely finished, yet I still need to build furniture for some of the rooms and finish the fireplace, but the structure is sound and the roof is tight." Bennett took her hands in his. "I wanted you to have a real home, Violet, not just my bachelor cabin or your aunt's small adobe, but a place that is ours from the beginning, a place where we can build our life together without any shadows of the past." Violet threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy that was overflowing from her heart. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I promise I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of your love." "You do not need to do anything to be worthy, Violet. You already are." Bennett kissed her again, then swept her up into his arms. "Now, Mrs. Wright, shall I carry you across the threshold of our new home?" Violet laughed and held on tight as Bennett carried her up the porch steps and through the front door. The inside of the house smelled like fresh cut wood and new beginnings. There was not much furniture yet, just a bed in the main bedroom and a table with 2 chairs in what would be the kitchen. But it was theirs, and that made it more beautiful than any mansion. Bennett set her down gently and lit a lamp, filling the room with warm, golden light. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wright." "Welcome home, Mr. Wright," Violet echoed, and she knew with absolute certainty that she finally, truly was home. Their first year of marriage was full of hard work and simple joys. Bennett continued to work his claim while Violet turned the bare house into a home, sewing curtains and planting a garden and learning to cook on the new stove Bennett had ordered from Santa Fe as a wedding present. She also started helping Mrs. Chen at the general store a few days a week, enjoying the work and the steady income it provided. The shadows of her past with Thomas did not disappear entirely. Violet still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at loud noises or sudden movements. But Bennett was patient and understanding, always there to hold her when she woke gasping from dreams of fists and shouting, always careful to announce his presence so he did not startle her. Gradually, the nightmares came less frequently, and the flinching became less automatic. By the spring of 1879, Violet realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling queasy in the mornings and unusually tired, and when she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she made the trip down to see the doctor in Silver City, who confirmed what she had suspected. Bennett's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down and apologized for being too rough. "Are you all right? Should you be on your feet? Do you need to sit down?" Violet laughed at his concern. "I am fine, Bennett. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not going to break. I know, but you are carrying my child, our child. I am allowed to worry." He placed his hand gently on her still flat belly, his expression full of wonder. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Violet agreed, and felt her own sense of wonder at the thought. A year ago, she had been running for her life, bruised and terrified and alone. Now she was standing in her own home with a husband who loved her, about to bring a new life into the world. The transformation felt almost miraculous. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as Violet's belly grew, so did the house. Bennett built a cradle and a rocking chair, added shelves for baby things, and started work on another bedroom for when the child was older. Mrs. Chen and the other women of Pinos Altos rallied around Violet, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and assistance with the heavier tasks as she grew bigger and more ungainly. On a cold November night, with snow falling softly outside and Bennett holding her hand and Mrs. Chen acting as midwife, Violet gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Benjamin after Bennett's father, and when the baby was cleaned and wrapped and placed in Violet's arms, she looked down at his tiny perfect face and felt her heart expand to accommodate this new, all-consuming love. "He is beautiful," Bennett said softly, touching one finger to Benjamin's tiny fist, "just like his mother." "He has your eyes," Violet said, noting the blue-gray color that she suspected would deepen as the baby grew. "And your stubborn chin." Bennett laughed and kissed her forehead. "Then he is going to be trouble, just like his father." As the years passed, their little family grew. Benjamin was joined by a sister, Rose, in 1881, and then another boy, Thomas, in 1883. Violet had initially resisted using that name, but Bennett had argued that they should not let her first husband's cruelty taint a perfectly good name, and that perhaps giving it to their son would help Violet reclaim it as something positive. He had been right, and little Thomas grew into a sweet-natured, gentle boy who bore no resemblance to his namesake, except for the name itself. Bennett's mine proved more profitable than he had initially expected, yielding enough silver that they were able to expand the house again and save money for their children's education. Violet continued to work at the general store, eventually becoming Mrs. Chen's partner in the business when the older woman decided to semi-retire. The town of Pinos Altos grew and changed around them. Some families moved away seeking new opportunities, while others arrived looking for fresh starts. But the core community remained strong, bound together by the harsh beauty of the land and the shared challenges of life on the frontier. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Violet back to the spot on the hillside where he had first shown her the house he was building. The children were spending the night with Mr. Garcia and his wife, giving Bennett and Violet a rare evening alone. "You ever regret it?" Bennett asked as they sat watching the sun set over the mountains. "Staying here instead of going back east where life might have been easier?" Violet leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body and the steady beat of his heart. Not for a single moment. This is where I found myself again. This is where I learned what love was supposed to feel like. This is home, even with all the hard times. The droughts and the harsh winters and the isolation, especially with those things, Violet said firmly. They taught me that I am stronger than I ever thought I was, and I got through them with you beside me, which made all the difference. Bennett pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. I love you, Violet Wright. I loved you from the moment I saw you trying to pull out that fence post in the blazing heat. I loved you when you rolled up your sleeves and I saw the bruises you were hiding. I loved you when you stood up to your husband with a rifle in your hands, and I love you now, every single day, more than the day before. I love you too, Violet whispered. You saved me, Bennett. You made me safe when I did not know what safety felt like anymore. You gave me a home and a family and a life worth living. We saved each other, Bennett corrected gently. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something that would last. Before you, I was just going through the motions of living. After you, I was finally alive. They sat together until the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms and the comfortable silence of two people who had built a life together from broken pieces and turned it into something beautiful. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of wood smoke and approaching autumn, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song to the moon. By the time their children were grown, Pinos Altos had transformed from a rough mining town into an established community with a proper school, a church, and even a small library that Violet had helped establish. Benjamin had followed his father into mining and had taken over Bennett's claim when Bennett's back finally gave out from years of hard labor. Rose had married a lawyer from Silver City and moved away, though she visited often with her own children. Thomas had surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, using his gentle nature and patience to educate the next generation of Pinos Altos' children. Bennett and Violet, now in their 50s with silver threading through their hair and laugh lines etched around their eyes, had settled into a comfortable routine. They still lived in the house Bennett had built, though it had been expanded and updated over the years. The mine had provided well enough that they did not have to work anymore, but neither of them was the type to sit idle. Bennett kept busy with carpentry projects and helping the younger miners, while Violet continued to work at the store a few days a week because she enjoyed the social interaction. One summer evening, they sat on their porch watching the grandchildren play in the yard. Benjamin's twin boys were chasing each other around the garden, while Rose's daughter sat carefully examining a flower, her small face scrunched up in concentration. Can you believe we have grandchildren? Violet said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes I still feel like that frightened woman who stepped off the stagecoach 20 years ago. You are nothing like that woman anymore, Bennett said, though you are still just as beautiful. Violet rolled her eyes at the compliment, but she was smiling. You are biased. Absolutely, Bennett agreed cheerfully. He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers the way he had done countless times over the years. Do you remember when I told you I was going to make you safe? Of course. It was one of the first real promises anyone ever kept to me. I meant it then, and I mean it now. I will keep you safe until my last breath, Violet Wright. I know, Violet said softly. But the truth is, we keep each other safe now. That is what partners do. They sat together until the sun set, and someone called the children in for supper. Just two people who had found each other in the midst of pain and fear and had built something strong enough to last a lifetime. The bruises that had once marked Violet's skin had faded long ago, replaced by the calluses of honest work and the soft wrinkles that came from a life full of laughter and love. Years later, when both of them had long since passed into the peaceful sleep of old age, their children and grandchildren would tell the story of how they had met and fallen in love. They would speak of Violet's courage in leaving an abusive husband and Bennett's determination to protect the woman he loved. They would talk about the house he had built for her and the life they had created together in the rough beauty of the New Mexico mountains. But the part of the story that the grandchildren loved best, the part they asked to hear again and again, was the moment when Violet had stood in her small adobe house with a rifle in her hands and finally taken control of her own destiny. Because that was the moment, they said, when she had truly saved herself. Bennett had been there to support her and love her and help her heal, but in the end, Violet had been the one to pull the trigger and reclaim her life. And in reclaiming her life, she had found love greater than she had ever imagined possible, in a place as wild and beautiful and unforgiving as the woman herself had become. The bruises had healed, the fear had faded, and what remained was a love story that would be passed down through generations, a testament to the power of choosing to survive, to heal, and to love again. The house Bennett built still stood on the hillside outside Pinos Altos, weathered by time but solid in its construction, much like the love that had inspired its creation. And on quiet summer evenings, when the wind blew just right through the pines, some said you could still hear the echo of laughter and the sound of a woman finally, truly free.